Transgender ideology is the idea that you can change sex or be born in the wrong body. That is not true, and it's causing harm. I'm not going to stop talking about this issue until that harm is addressed. I'm an equality and human rights barrister. I was approached by someone I knew who knew a teacher, and this teacher had been in trouble for so-called misgendering one of their students. A girl wanted to be known as he, and the teacher didn't want to use that pronoun and got into trouble. This teacher, when I spoke to him about his own personal situation at his school, told me that he knew a lot of parents who were looking for support and perhaps even some understanding of how they might bring a legal case in respect of what had happened to their children. And so he put me in touch with a few parents who I met and talked about their personal stories. And then we announced with the Bad Law Project that we intended to bring legal action against the Department for Education in the United Kingdom. And then I was contacted by many, many people, but not just from the UK, but from all over the world, from the Caribbean, from Canada, from Ireland. So if I want to know, for example, what the Gender Recognition Act says, I can go and look at the legislation. I have a voice in how that legislation can be changed if I think there's something wrong with that legislation. But when something is a policy, a diversity and inclusion policy, which is written not by Parliament, not by people that I vote for, not by people that I can approach, not by people that I can petition, I'm simply left with a huge question mark. Who wrote this policy? Who decided that LGBT was going to be a massive campaign in schools and that children would be told routinely that it's okay to be trans? That some people are born in the wrong body? Well, the answer to that can only be these political lobby groups. The most famous one is Stonewall. It's a campaigning group that has its history, I suspect, in the United States, because the Stonewall was the name of a pub, famous gay pub. It's an American context, it's an American reference. But Britain has its own Stonewall. And Stonewall is the most famous example of a gay, supposedly gay, LGBT campaigning group that we know now has been actively consulting with civil servants and with politicians to make sure that the policies of diversity, equality and inclusion, wherever they are disseminated, include this idea of the T within the umbrella of LGBT. In fact, this umbrella keeps growing, so we're losing track of it. So now the LGBT umbrella has become LGBTQIA+. And I think you can do whatever you want under that umbrella. But you can do it, and you can say, I'm doing this in your child's school. It's in all these policies that we're seeing. And as I say, when you put them into schools, because schools now are mandated to teach something called relationships and sex education, and we're now seeing more and more materials that are being directly targeted in the name of LGBTQIA+ equality, with children learning that they can be anything under the rainbow they want to be. So a boy is told that he can be a girl and he can be a lesbian. He finds that cool. He finds that idea cool, maybe because he's a heterosexual boy who likes girls. This way he can be a lesbian in a boy's body. This is suggested through, again, programs of instruction like personal social health education, relationships and sex education. And what we've seen in recent years is that the statistics of children identifying as being born in the wrong body have rocketed, and children are signing up for medical consultations on the basis that they're trans or LGBTQ. And the numbers of children who who are taking cross-sex hormones has rocketed. The number of girls who are binding their breasts from an early age as they enter into puberty, they're binding their breast. You can download chest binders from these lobby group websites like Mermaids, which is another one. You can see that this is a pernicious, pernicious idea that we have allowed into our schools. And it has serious harms, medical, physical, psychological trauma, not just for the child, but for the family. And we've never been allowed to have a conversation about what are we talking about. Is a transsexual man who wears female clothing in a bar for gay men, is that person in the same category as a 12-year-old girl who is worried about puberty and feels embarrassed about it? And it's come about because of a deal that has been done between political activist groups and people in senior decision-making positions. And because it's been done more or less without any public scrutiny, those activists we call the third sector, because they usually have charitable status. And there are, I've mentioned Mermaids and Stonewall, but there are many of these charities, and they are under the rubric of LGBTQIA+. They are promoting this notion, this ideological notion that you can be born in the wrong body, and they're also promoting other things which are very controversial, such as, sexual practices that perhaps are not appropriate to be taught at certain ages. So then the next question is, well, why? What do these charities, well, what do they get out of it? I mean, you know, I used to be a bit of a Marxist in my youth, so as a Marxist I would have said, well, money. I'm no longer a Marxist for the record, but the answer to that question remains the same. It's a hugely profitable industry. I believe a detransitioner called Scott Nugent in the United States, who transitioned from female to male and then detransitioned, she actually put a figure on it. She actually quoted how much she had calculated that the transgender child was worth for the pharmaceutical companies. And I think that the charity sector also profits because they are selling materials to schools because they are experts on this new thing which nobody understands. But if we look at the non-monetary explanation for this craze, which has taken off notably in Western democratic countries, so well, what we call Western democratic countries, whether they are Western or democratic is another question. But in the United States, predominantly, Britain, to some extent, Australia, Canada, you know, the Anglosphere seems to be particularly vulnerable. Ireland, Scotland, we see these countries, you know, possessed by this idea of trans. We don't see that idea so popular or so promoted in other areas of the world. And I think one psychological explanation for that might be that in areas outside of the West, the family is a more important institution. It's valued collectively, socially. The idea of the family, it's just the transgender child stands alone, and the only people that they can turn to, particularly if their family don't understand what's happening or are concerned, the only people they can go to, imagine that, are the charities who are there to support them and the doctors who are there to treat them. And you see how it works. You're making the child into an instrument of this new industry that's growing up, which is it's a combination of corporate power and greed and state power and authority. I think the West needs to wake up and start thinking about what are its priorities. Do we prioritise pharmaceutical profit over a child's health?